Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We continue to work our way through Big Ten Championship Week. That is the focus right now as Penn State tries to punch its ticket for a bye week in the college football playoff and potentially enter the equation for a number one overall seed in the playoff tournament. But we have a lot more to get to for that game a little bit later on this episode. We are going to go dive in on the number one ranked Ducks with an Oregon insider from within our 24/7 sports network. Stay tuned for that. But, of course, this is National Signing Day. And I mentioned earlier in the week when we had Tyler Cavaruso on to look ahead to this Wednesday. Look, we're not used to having this occur during a game week. Let's be honest. We're not used to going to cover practice a couple hours after going to a National Signing Day press conference. But that's the scenario right now. We're all working through it. It's going to mean we're going to shortchange the recruiting conversation just a bit this week. We're going to try to keep it to about 20 minutes on this episode, and I promise we will dive in much further next week when we get a chance to come up for air. Whatever happens in Indianapolis happens. Penn State will be off next weekend, so we will give this 2026 class the attention it deserves. We'll go through some of the finer details. We'll welcome in 24/7 sports analysts. We'll do our best to help you have a really strong picture of this 2025 recruiting class. We're going to stick with some of the basics this time around, and to get into that, we'll bring in Tyler Cavaruso, our resident recruiting insider. And Tyler, you just heard me say it. This is a unique situation that Penn State is working its way through. Not to mention you got the transfer portal opening on Monday. You can understand why James Franklin and every coach seemingly across the country thinks something needs to be done about the December calendar. But we are just lowly reporters. We must do our job. We must cover what is to be covered. Today, that means practice later. But earlier today, on a Wednesday, it meant National Signing Day festivities, and 26 players ultimately signed with Penn State. There were no surprises, whether positive or negative to this point. But remember, this is an early signing period that extends through Friday. And as we'll get to in a moment with you, Tyler, things may not be all done just yet. But let's go to the class as constructed. Penn State gets to the finish line with the players they started the day with, and that's always a good thing. What stands out to you overall about the completion or close to completion of this 2025 class?
First things first, congratulations to each of the 26 guys who signed this morning, and really to every other recruit that signed today as well. The realization of a lifelong dream being met here at the beginning of the early signing period. You saw a couple different Penn State commits get emotional when talking to James Franklin and the staff, going through the final day of really their high school recruitment before putting pen to paper. So it's a great day. Getting to know these guys throughout the cycle is one of the many fun parts of the job. So to see them reach the point where they're getting ready to go play college ball now, it's special for them. I think it's special for us to some degree as well. And this class it's been a big talking point in the sense that, is it a group that can help Penn State get over the hump and beat the elites of college football? I think it's a solid class. I think it has plenty of players who will help Penn State win football games at the next level. The one thing that stands out to me when I look at this group is, compared to recent groups, maybe it lacks that real elite top end talent at the level we've seen in recent cycles. There's only one top 100 guy in Paramus Catholic offensive lineman, Malachi Goodman, out of New Jersey. Beyond that, you've got plenty of 4-stars, plenty of top 24/7 prospects sprinkled in. So it might not have the star power of past classes, but it's a contingent of solid players, in my opinion. And there are specific position groups I'm sure I'm higher on than some others might be higher on. There might be position groups I'm lower on than some people. They might have more optimistic hopes for them. So it's a solid class all in all. That's the way I've been viewing it from the start. It might not have that top end guy, like I said, but it's still a group that could help Penn State, help James Franklin keep this program rolling in the right direction.
And we know they want to supplement and will supplement through the transfer portal. That window is going to open for the postseason next Monday. We'll see what comes out of that. But you look at the current Penn State roster, the one that's going to play Oregon this Saturday. They've got 2 transfers starting at the cornerback position. They've got a transfer starting at the right tackle spot. So we have seen an impact from the most recent wave of college veterans. So remember, you're not just looking at a bunch of freshmen showing up and saying, help us win the Big Ten championship, get to the playoffs. You're also going to be bringing in some veterans scattered along the way. Penn State, as things stand now with these 26 commits on Wednesday afternoon, knowing that this cycle isn't over yet, you've still got a few days left here. You've got the traditional February signing period or signing day, but Penn State, number 18 overall nationally with 26 commits. 17 of them are considered 4-star composite prospects. None of them are considered 5-star composite prospects. And who are they looking up at within the Big Ten Conference? Well, Oregon's at number 4 nationally. Ohio State's at number 5 nationally. Michigan is at number 7 nationally. USC is 13 nationally. And then Penn State follows in that Big Ten pecking order. The way we're going to approach this, Tyler, for this specific segment on the podcast before we dive in deeper next week, we're going to go position by position and try to give people perspective on what they're bringing into each of those rooms. And at quarterback, boy, do we get some effusive praise today from recruiting coordinator Kenny Sanders about Beckham Kritza, who I would say is the mystery man of this recruiting class. I feel like there is always one or two of those guys. Tyler Warren was the mystery man in his recruiting class. It worked out pretty well. But we just don't know what to go off of here for Beckham Kritza, and a couple of varieties where he's been with a few different programs. He's been at a public school in Colorado. He's been at private schools in Southern California. He's been at public schools in Southern Florida, a couple of them now. And he's 2 wins away from winning a state championship as the starting quarterback at Chaminade Madonna Prep in South Florida. So it could end really well for him as a senior. But let's remember, he started the season at Miami Central. He was at Fairview in Boulder, Colorado last year for much of the year, although he started that season at Miami Central. We've had a hard time figuring out who Kritza is. We knew the staff really loved some of the traits they saw from him on the camp circuit going into his senior season. What do you make of this pickup ultimately? And by the way, we just heard from Kenny Sanders, Andy Frank, who's the general manager of Penn State, and then also Alan Zamitis, former All-American Penn State defensive back, who's now a recruiting coordinator like Kenny Sanders. So a lot of the things we're going to reference today are going to be from commentary from those three.
Yeah, Kritza's traveled the path really unlike any recruit in this Penn State signing class, and that has created a lot of questions about his ability, to translate to being a high-level Power 4 quarterback one day. There have been instances where me and you have pretty candidly discussed the fact that he wasn't getting reps, and the biggest thing in his development was he was going to have to be on the field, taking on a decent level of competition and getting the reps that he needed to get where he needs to be in his development. He's getting those reps now at the end of his senior season for Chaminade Madonna after that mid-year transfer. We stepped into a starting spot and has done quite well for one of the better programs in Florida. But I've said this before, and I continue to think it's kind of like T.A. Cunningham in the sense that if he gets to Penn State and can benefit from having stability, not having to, move around from place to place, you can stay in one place for an extended period of time. You're around the same people on a daily basis. And also with Kritza, you got to keep in mind, too, all he's going to have to worry about now is learning one playbook. He's been learning offensive system after offensive system throughout his high school career. It's not like Cunningham in the sense where you just go, you play somewhere on the defensive line, you roll the balls out there, you get the job done. Kritza has to get to these schools, learn the systems, and when he gets to Penn State, he's going to be locked in on one playbook. He's going to be learning one set of verbiage. He's going to be able to lock in on what he has to do. Because I do agree with the sentiment that he has pretty much every physical tool you could ask for from a raw skill set perspective. It's really about him putting it all together and taking the next steps in his progression from this point on. We've seen the arm talent. We've seen him improve mechanically. As an underclassman, I think there were definitely some mechanical questions, and those questions still exist. But he's become a more refined passer. And now that he's getting those reps, I think he can maybe parlay that momentum. He's going to be on campus as an early enrollee in January. Maybe he can keep that arrow pointing up. But I think the best does lie ahead for Kritza. I think that he's going to have every chance to succeed at Penn State. And welcoming into this class, especially given the numbers change in college football with scholarship allocation and roster spots, it makes sense. And Penn State's going to work hard to develop Beckham Kritza. Danny O'Brien's taken this task on, and he has a lot of internal support. He's going to be supported to the fullest during his time in Happy Valley. So I think Kritza will really benefit from that on and off the field.
I don't think anybody in that Lash building for Penn State anticipates Beckham Kritza is going to be an active member of the offensive plan next fall. But I think what you hope is that when 2026 spring ball rolls around and it's year 2 for Beckham and he's got that under his belt, and who knows what the quarterback room looks like at that point, you hope that he's kind of caught his breath, looked around him, sunk his feet into the ground, and really was able to deliver on that year of tutelage with Danny O'Brien, Andy Kotelnicki and company. Something else that was interesting, this is a 6'5", just about 200-pound quarterback. Kenny Sanders said he will be 240 pounds in 2 years. They have zero qualms with him. They don't think he's an elite athlete, but they surely believe he has the elite traits of a quarterback. And Kenny Sanders' comment here, he says he thinks he has the best raw arm talent of any quarterback in this class. And so take that for what it's worth. He's a 3-star at 24/7 Sports. Doesn't have the body of work as some of the quarterbacks we've seen here come in. Doesn't have the linear path of some of the quarterbacks we've seen come here, but consider him a really intriguing project moving forward for Penn State. And as you said, he'll get started in January. That'll be important for his development. Over at the running back position, they went to opposite ends of the state. Philadelphia for Jabri Wallace-Coleman, who formerly was committed to Georgia earlier in his high school career. And then Tyke Hayes from the Pittsburgh area at Aliquippa. Outstanding career for both these guys. Coleman, 3 1,000-yard seasons at Imhotep in Philadelphia. Hayes had about 7,000 rushing yards, 100 touchdowns in his career. And James Franklin said he considered Hayes to be the most underappreciated running back, not just in the state of Pennsylvania, in the entire country. And that's a big statement. Obviously, the head coach is going to look out for his own guy, but you've got a couple running backs here who aren't ranked as highly as Nick Singleton was or as highly as even a Katron Allen was. But you get these guys in from different ends of the state. You put them in Jaywan Sider's room. They've had a lot of success bringing in tandem running backs, having them compete against each other in that frying pan, and then seeing what you get out the other side. I like their odds of finding a legitimate multi-year playmaker at running back from this class. I don't know who it will be. It could be both, but I really like how these two guys stack up and the competitive drive we've heard about both of them.
Yeah, both have a lot of redeeming qualities coming out of the backfield. Both are do-it-all backs. They make their money running between the tackles and getting them to second level. No doubt about that. But they can catch passes. They can make plays as a pass catcher out of the backfield. They pick up in pass pro. So, you're looking at 2 potential 3-down backs if they get to where they need to be in their development. I like Jabri Coleman a lot. I've said that after seeing him camp in Baltimore and participating in the Under Armour series in May, it gave me a better idea of his all-around skill set, and I continue to remain pretty optimistic about his future. For me, I look at what Tyke Hayes has accomplished throughout his career at Aliquippa, and the more I think about it, the more I go back, watch some of that film and just evaluate Tyke Hayes as a runner and take into account all the internal feedback we've gotten on Hayes throughout his recruitment. It's kind of difficult not to be excited about what might lie ahead for him at Penn State. He's one of those in-state guys who might not be one of the highest-ranked prospects coming out of high school. He might not have some of the national notoriety as some of the other members of the class, but when you look up and you look back 5, 6, 7 years from now, and you look back at Tyke Hayes' career at Penn State, he could be one of those backs that made a huge impact on James Franklin's program. I think he has that in him. I think Coleman has that in him as well, no doubt. But Hayes is the one who really stands out to me because physically, going back to who he was as an underclassman, he's developed so nicely on that front. He's remained a tough runner throughout his high school career, one of the toughest players in Western Pennsylvania to bring down. He's a tough kid. He's only going to get better. Coleman's Philly tough. So you got 2 really hard-nosed running backs in this class, and Penn State cannot be happier about that.
You've got to go back a little while to the 2020 recruiting class, I believe, with Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith. The last time we saw freshman wide receivers show up to campus and actually take on a key rotational role or even a starting job during their first year on campus. We didn't see that lately. Tyseer Denmark caught a touchdown as time expired in the regular season finale, but he was a reserve piece and did not burn red shirt. Jeff Exeter Jr., Kobe Howard, Lyric Samuel, Matthew Outen. That's your wide receiver class for Penn State as things stand. Exeter and Outen are both 4-stars at 24/7 Sports. Howard and Samuel are both 4-star composites in the industry consensus. Outen's the top-ranked dude, top 24/7 prospect. And when we spoke with Alan Zamitis, the recruiting coordinator, he was the name on offense that he went to about being particularly excited for. And his train of thought for that, I think, matched up with how I feel about Outen. You think about Andy Kotelnicki's outside-the-box perspective and how he utilizes different pieces. Outen's the guy who was all over the field for his offense. He was playing quarterback, running the ball a bunch. Certainly when he's able to be a pass target, it is really impressive. But he's somebody that I think has the physical frame already as a freshman showing up to campus and the playmaking skills where he could be a really fun gadget player right off the bat. And we'll see how it goes. But 4 guys here. Feels like they need at least one of them to show up prepared to get into game action next September. Who would be your guess for that guy?
Allen's probably the most likely candidate for me, just based on his skill set, his physical tools, and the fact that that combination is something Penn State hasn't really had at the wide receiver position in a little bit. And Allen's going to be getting to campus as an early enrollee, which I think is massive for both sides here, because as impactful as Allen has the potential to be right off the bat, the fact of the matter is he does still have to learn more about the wide receiver position, still has to develop on that front, because he's an elite athlete, but he's still coming along as a natural wideout. And also, it's going to be a big jump up in competition from Virginia to Penn State. I want to see how Alvin's going to adjust to that at the next level. Same kind of thing with Lyric Samuel going from New York ball to Penn State. There's a learning curve, and there's an adjustment process that both of these guys are going to have to go through. You know, Jeff Exner is coming up from McDonough, where he's played a really good schedule throughout his high school career. He strikes me as another guy who could be ready. He might not have some of the top end speed.
Summer enrollee though, Tyler, just to note that not coming in until next summer.
That's the unfortunate part about it, because, you know, McDonough doesn't do the mid-year graduation stuff. Same deal with Xavier Thomas on the other side of the ball at corner. He's not going to be here till the summer, since Central Catholic in Pittsburgh doesn't do the mid-year graduation deal. But yeah, I think Exner, physically, he is where he needs to be a contributor, or at least, you know, challenge to be a contributor. It would help him immensely if he was coming early, but that's out of his hands. So it is what it is in that regard. But I do think that Exner has the tools to be an impact wideout for Penn State. His testing numbers might not jump out at you from a speed perspective, but he's a good route runner, you know, good short area. He moves well in that regard. So I'm optimistic on his future. And then with Kobe Howard, you know, I think about a guy like Howard, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, where I'm higher on some position groups than others. Guy like Howard, there's been a lot of questions about him throughout the cycle. There have been points where, is he a take? Is he not a take? Does he have what it takes to play at Penn State? Does he not have what it takes to play at Penn State? One of the aspects of Howard that the Penn State staff really likes is when the ball's in his hands, more often than not, he makes plays. And he's been doing that against solid competition down in Florida throughout his high school career. Now, his senior year at Chaminade-Madonna, his lone year at Chaminade-Madonna, it's been hampered by injuries, and he's still not back from a broken hand that has sapped him of a lot of the year. Penn State and Howard are hoping that he'll be back on the field before things come to an end, but he still has the open field skill set to make him a solid wideout for Penn State. So is there an elite wideout talent, the kind of talent that Penn State fans covered by the like of a Quincy Porter, who signed with Ohio State on Wednesday? Probably not. I think Alton can definitely reach that point. I've been effusive in my praise for him for a while now. I think he'd be one of the best players in this class if he can put it together as a receiver. So we'll see where this group is in a couple years, because it's not the most highly ranked. There are questions, I think, with each guy to at least some degree, because even Lyric Samuel, he oozes potential, and we've said that over and over again, but he still has to grow physically, and that jump in competition, it's going to be a tough deal. You got to see how he reacts to that. So I think there are questions with each guy, but they're not questions that can't be answered. You know what I mean? All these questions, they can be addressed, and it can help these guys as they develop. So that's an intriguing group to me.
They will follow a 3-man 2024 class led by Tyser Denmark, gotten 4 games. Josiah Brown did not get involved in any game action. And then Peter Gonzalez was injured during preseason camp, sidelined for the season. So a lot to learn about that group still. At tight end, we've kind of known about Matt Henderson for a while now, going back to last spring, early summer. He is a dynamic receiving threat down at Powhatan High School for Virginia, making that transition from a perimeter threat to a guy who can do it in line and do everything a tight end needs to do in the Big Ten. But he was over 120 catches, close to 2,000 receiving yards as an upperclassman. He also caught almost 20 total touchdowns. I think he was over 20 touchdowns as well. But we've discussed him in the past, so I want you to take this opportunity to discuss the next tight end that Penn State has added to the party, and that occurred this week. A recent Purdue decommitment flipped into Penn State's class, and you're thinking going from a 1-11 Big Ten team to an 11-1 Big Ten team. No wonder Brian Kordovich was smiling so wide this morning when they got him on that phone call, on that call with James Franklin. We're still figuring this guy out. We've got a lot to learn. I know they think that he is a do the dirty work kind of tight end, a guy who can move defenders and do that kind of stuff. But what do you make of adding him to this? And while we're on the subject, what is going on with Andrew Olish, the top 50 tight end prospect from the state of Pennsylvania, who has not yet announced his decision but remains committed to Michigan.
Versatility is the name of the game with Kordovich. He could work as an inline tight end, could operate with his hand in the dirt as a blocker. He's a physical kid, and he's a good pass catcher as well when he has to split out wide. So he kind of checks all of the boxes for Penn State with what they look for at the tight end position. And, going back to June when he camped for the staff and really impressed that day, there was talk about him getting back for an official visit later in that month. That wound up not happening because Kordovich committed to Purdue. Had that never happened, I think there's a chance Kordovich is in this class dating back to the summer because Penn State really liked him. They stayed in touch with him throughout the fall. They pushed to get him to campus for that official visit for the regular season finale against Maryland. Once the staff opened the door for Kordovich to join this class, he walked right through it in pretty short order, really. He backed off his commitment to Purdue Sunday night in the wake of the firing head coach Ryan Walters. A couple days later, he's in the class. Penn State's excited to have Kordovich on board. He's going to be an early enrollee, so he's going to hit the ground running in his development, trying to make an early impact on the loaded Penn State tight end room. And with Olish, they got the two guys on board, but they're going to keep trying with him. He's an elite in-state talent. Penn State wants him. Michigan's fighting to keep him on board. Oregon's still in the mix after not being able to flip five-star Lincoln Cure away from Kansas State. That's been one of the more, I don't want to say surprising, but one of the bigger storylines of this early signing period so far. Cure took an official visit to Oregon this past weekend while Olish was also on campus. Many thought Oregon was going to be able to get that one done. Cure would be the second tight end in the class, along with Vander Plug, who's a standout from California. Didn't happen. Oregon remains in play for Andrew Olish. And Penn State's continuing to work at that one. Conversations have been ongoing, really dating back to this morning. Penn State's going to be working that one until Olish signs. He's going to have his ceremony Friday, 3 p.m. Southern Lehigh High. We'll be, keeping our ear to the ground, working the phone, and see what's going to happen. It remains to be seen if a decision is going to be levied before that ceremony takes place or begins. We'll see what happens on that front. He's moving on his timeline right now. He's not going to be signing on this first day of the early signing period. That leaves the door open for Penn State to continue making its push. Maybe they can make some moves, but everything I hear still, Michigan remains optimistic about its chances of holding on to Olish. So there's been a lot of intel flooding in on this one leading up to his signing.
On the offensive line, Penn State goes over to New Jersey for a couple players. Michael Troutman, Malachi Goodman. Goodman is the top-ranked offensive recruit in this class. And then you've got Owen Alacine from up in New England, a guy that we've discussed in the past, seen him in the camp circuit, building up his body. A little bit of similarities to Garrett Sexton in that regard, but he's got this hockey background at the high school level where you're picturing a 6'7", 6'8" offensive tackle skating around on the ice. Really interesting athlete. And then Brady O'Hara, you want to talk about a dynamic here in the recruiting class. It's a guy who was a tight end for his high school in Pittsburgh, now going to be playing offensive line. We saw him get some offensive line work during summer camp. So to me, it feels like you got a bit of a blend of potential instant impact offensive linemen here and also more long-term project types. Who is the one guy you would focus in on saying is capable of coming in? And I hate to say pulling off a Cooper Cousins because Cooper Cousins is very rare, but being that kind of a presence where by the time we get to the end of preseason camp in 2025, the coaches and players are talking about, well, he's probably going to be a factor.
If Goodman was enrolling in January, I'd probably say him, but he's going to be enrolling in the summer. So I'm going to go with Owen Alacine. I think Owen Alacine getting to campus in January is an early enrollee. It starts the molding process early, and that's going to be huge for him because physically 6'7", 275, his frame combined with his athleticism makes him a high-level prospect. That's why he got the bump to 4-star status just before the beginning of the early signing period over at 24/7. So I think the second that he gets to work with Phil Charwin and hits the weight room with Chuck Losey, you're going to see the start of a potentially fast-track development. Does that mean he's cracking the 2 deep as a true freshman? Maybe not. Does that mean he's fighting for playing time right off the bat as a true freshman? Maybe not. Reaching that Cooper Cousins level, that takes a special combination on the development front. But Alacine has stood out to me for a while. I know he stood out to you after we saw him in action on really outside the practice field working with Phil Charwin before his official visit in June. So he would be my pick right now. But if it were reversed and Malachi Goodman was enrolling early, I'd go with him because he's a really, really good player.
Yeah, that enrollment really kicks off your timeline of development, and Tyler Calvaruso has a full breakdown here on Wednesday about this class and where guys stand on whether they're getting to campus in January as early high school graduates or waiting until next summer with the rest of the class. Staying in the trenches, going to the defensive line. I really like this defensive line class. I think there's a couple guys. One's not as quite as underrated as he was about a week ago. Ivan Kamaju is now inside the top 24/7 rankings. He's a guy that you could see defensive end or defensive tackle in his future. James Franklin said during today's broadcast of their National Signing Day festivities that he might be the most improved member of this class over the course of their senior year. But I think Randy Adarica, if you working your way through this recruiting list of 24/7 Sports, I think you got to scroll too far to get to his name. 50 tackles for loss, 20 sacks the last 2 seasons for Miami Central. And when you're at Miami Central High School, you're not playing a bunch of cupcakes. You got a nice schedule there. So he's somebody that I think that power interior, penetrative force, he can be that kind of guy. And I'm curious how quickly he can come together for him. But Deshaun Burnett is somebody who's been playing linebacker a bunch. He's been all over the field at the high school level, out in Monty Christian in Pittsburgh. We think he is going to eventually blossom into an edge rusher. And then the other name there is Cortez Harris, who I think he's only about 200 pounds or so. He's a smaller guy at this point in terms of his physique, but you've heard them raving about his potential, what he can bring off the edge. And he's got a fun personality. I can tell you that. I just picked up on that on Wednesday. So when we look at this group, because we don't have time to go one by one, who is the highest ceiling guy? I think it's probably the guy I failed to mention, Chaz Coleman, who stuck around this class after a late offer from Ohio State. He's the Ohio kid. And, man, hearing the way this staff described him today, this was a huge, huge win for them on signing day to not let him end up landing in Columbus.
Yeah, keeping him away from Ohio State was massive from a perception standpoint, from a prospect standpoint. Penn State is so bullish on Chaz Coleman's potential, what he could do as a pass rusher to the next level. It's either him or Ivan Kamaju. Those two actually met for the first time today.
That was funny. They were introduced this morning, and they didn't quite know what to do about it. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that was a fun moment from this morning. But I think it's either of those two guys from a ceiling perspective. Kamaju is interesting in the sense that right now where he's at physically, he's probably going to get his first crack at sticking at defensive end. But at some point, Mother Nature's probably going to kick in, and he's probably going to grow into a role on the interior where he's a productive interior pass rusher. No matter what position Ivan Kamaju plays at the next level, I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he might have one of the highest him and Coleman might have two of the highest overall ceilings in this class on either side of the ball. I think the sky's the limit for both of those guys, especially Coleman in the sense that he's got that basketball background. He's still learning so much about playing the defensive line. Deion Barnes has to be salivating getting these two guys into his room here really relatively soon. Kamaju's an early enrollee. Coleman's been playing basketball this winter, so he'll be around in the summer. And before we move on, I just got to be honest. I don't really understand the Randy Adarica situation from a rankings perspective. I think he plays a really high level of competition in Florida, and the production matches the talent. We're not talking about upside necessarily with Randy Adarica. He's been going out and doing it as an upperclassman throughout his career at Miami Central. I don't know if it's a measurable deal. I'm not quite sure, but I think that as time goes on and we have the conversation of who could outplay their ranking at Penn State, Adarica might be close to the top of that list.
Yeah, and by the way, he could be someone who gets to campus and kind of like Xavier Gilliam did this year.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Shows off the power, shows off the strength, has people talking, yet defensive tackle is one of the toughest positions for a freshman to play right off the bat. And that's why you had to wait to see some injuries and roster moves to see Gilliam really hit the field with any kind of extent late in the season. Over at linebacker, we're including LeVar Arrington, the second on this list, but we know that he could also develop into an edge rusher. There's some room for growth there, but he's more than just his name. 12 sacks as a senior, a guy that really wowed in some showcase events, worked his way up our rankings at 24/7 Sports, well inside the top 24/7. And Dad was sitting by his side, Nittany Lions legend LeVar Arrington. He said he's just along for the ride now in a conversation with James Franklin. And then Cam Smith, big flip earlier this fall from the Duke Blue Devils, and Manny Diaz, linebacker at St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. I think it could be really important for them to start to develop more of a pipeline with St. Joe's Prep in Philly. A lot of guys have come out of that program to the power conference level, and very few of them have come to Penn State during the last decade. And then the other name is Alex Tash. And unfortunately, injuries have kind of impacted the way we can evaluate him coming off of his senior year. But you can tell, asking around the program, there is a love for how this guy plays the game, for what they think he can bring. And they love his running back film as well. They think, like Tony Rojas, he can use that running back experience, high-level production as a rusher at the high school level, and he kind of navigates his way through the box defensively because of that vision. So a collection of linebackers there. Is anyone in that group? Because this is a spot, the last couple of years, you've seen some young talent accrued, but not really break through. I guess Tony Rojas did get to that starting role, but we've had trouble seeing depth be solidified. So I think the door is a little bit open. Who on this list do you think could sprint through the door, come into campus and say, I'm ready to compete for a two-deep job?
Probably Arrington, but from a long-term perspective, I don't know what exactly he's going to be, because his physical development is going to be paramount when it comes to whether or not he's lining up on the defensive line, rushing off the edge, or playing stand-up linebacker. He could do both. Penn State loves him in either spot. He's showcased that versatility throughout his high school career, so there aren't really any worries from a positional standpoint on Arrington the second. Wherever he plays, he plays. Penn State's confidence he's able to develop and produce at a high level once he gets where, as an upperclassman. Cam Smith, he's a little bit smaller, so I think weak side linebacker he's going to have to adjust. But Cam Smith's been so productive throughout his high school career.
Watch out for him, man. Watch out for him. He went over that bridge from South Jersey, where he started his high school career, to Philadelphia. It's a big jump to go to St. Joe's Prep. They play a national level, and you can make a case that he was one of the most impressive players on either side of the ball the last couple of seasons for a powerhouse nationally. And Alan Zamitis brought up a good point today. He's going to have defensive backs on Penn State's roster turning their head, checking behind them in terms of speed. He brings that kind of quickness to the linebacker room. So some intangibles there and some skill set things there where he's just somebody that I'm going to be monitoring as soon as he shows up.
You should be, because he's just so athletic, man. And he's so smart. If you watch him play the linebacker position, his instincts are really good. When you combine a guy who has high-level instincts with high-level athleticism, you get a high-level player more often than not. So Smith, there's a lot of internal excitement about him. You kind of just outlined it, but even going before that, there's been a lot of people inside that last building who are excited about Cam Smith. Tash, he's dealt with some unfortunate news on the injury front with that shoulder. That's always a concern when you're a linebacker. He was off to such a good start as a senior before he was forced to the sideline. And I think he had a chance to earn that 4-star had he kept rolling. Unfortunately, it came to a premature end for him. He's working to get back to full strength. The hope is that his shoulder keeps it healthy at the next level. Again, linebacker, it's a tough, physically demanding, brute position. So as long as he stays healthy, I think he's going to be a really good player for Penn State, because testing-wise, just going back to early in his recruitment, man, he did everything so well from an athletic standpoint, and it translated to the field. Again, the talent matched the production, and I think as long as he stays healthy, he's on the right track.
We're going to finish with defensive backs here, and got a good mix, cornerback, safety. You got some guys with positional versatility, and we know Penn State loves to do that. We've seen it over the years where a guy shows up at cornerback, gets his feet wet for his first year on campus, ends up being a starting safety like a Zakee Wheatley or a Keaton Ellis. Time and time again, that has happened. But Darius Dixon is the top-ranked defensive prospect in this class. He makes his move from one of the prominent programs in Southern California, Mater Dei High School. If you want to talk about establishing some pipelines, that would work well for Penn State too. He's coming from the West Coast, like LeVar Arrington, another California recruit, and then Jameer Joseph from St. Joe's in New Jersey, and Montville, one of the top programs in the Garden State perennially. A guy that really wowed on the basketball court. I know that they loved his hoops highlights as well as what he did on the field. Xavier Thomas from Central Catholic out in Pittsburgh, one of the earlier commitments in this class. Josh Johnson, over a guy who can safety or cornerback. He was committed to Louisville initially, flipped over to Penn State. We heard Alan Zamitis today describe Johnson as maybe the most physical defensive back he's scouted in recent cycles. And then rounding it out, Braswell Thomas. Braswell Thomas is from my neck of the woods in South Jersey. I think they had some questions about the competition he faced. He was an early name on the recruiting radar, then kind of tapered off, but showed up in a big way and resurfaced with a strong camp performance this summer. receiver, defensive back. They ultimately convinced Penn State staff that's somebody that they need to get into the building and develop moving forward. So Braswell Thomas, injury situation there too. He was pretty emotional during his signing day experience with James Franklin. I believe that was tied into it because of what he lost out on this senior year, but they're confident he'll come in and make an impact. So again, not going one by one with this group with you, Tyler, but laid out some names for you. Who could be the next freshman? You can give us multiple names if you like, but we've seen freshmen show up, make an impact. Dejan Lane this year. Last year, you saw Elliott Washington, Zion Tracy burn red shirts as a freshman. This is a spot that is a little more accessible for freshmen to get in and play, it seems, on the Penn State roster. Who could be the guys, whether it's cornerback, safety, to enter that mix?
From a competition perspective, Darius Dixon has seen everything that he's need to see on the high school level playing at modern day. He's played against the best of the best on the West Coast. I think he'll be ready to go in that regard. What I'm interested to see with him is how he's going to translate athletically. He doesn't have some of the same athletic markers as some of the guys currently in that cornerback room, but he's a really good player, really good prospect. He's the highest rated defensive prospect among this Penn State signing class. There's a lot of optimism about him as a DB, his ball skills, his coverage skills. Really, really good player throughout his career at modern day. Xavier Thomas also stands out to me, a corner from Central Catholic. We talked about a little bit earlier when we were having our spiel about early enrollment. I saw him against State College High in the PIAA 6A quarters. He just makes plays, whether it be on the outside as a corner, lined up inside in the nickel. He's fast. He's physical when he has to be. Good ball skills. I could see him being a better version of Daquan Hardy if he develops as I think he can. I think he has that in him. So either of those two guys, Thomas is going to have to, fast track himself on the physical development front when he gets to campus in the summer. He's going to be around 5'11", 175 getting to campus. He's going to be looking to add more weight. So how that goes for him will probably go a long way to determine how early he can make an impact. But just to touch on Josh Johnson real quick, he is indeed one of the most physical DBs that I've gotten the chance to watch this cycle as well. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. He plays with a fire that a lot of other DBs in this class, quite frankly, in my opinion, do not have. And I think that's going to be a huge deal for him when it comes to succeeding at Penn State. He's going to have that it factor that we talk about pretty early.
I like this defensive back class a lot. I like the defensive line class a lot. I don't mean to shortchange anywhere, but I just see a lot of guys who could show up and make coaches consider them as true freshmen. And that's tough to do. I mean, we only saw three burn red shirts over the course of this entire season. Only one of those on the defensive side of the ball, Dejan Lane at safety. But there's a lot of candidates here. I just think based off of the film, based on where they are already physically and who's coming in about a month, where we get into the next fall, I just feel like freshmen could be more of a factor defensively than what we witnessed. Of course, part of that will be who actually leaves the roster, who turns pro, who hits the transfer portal, how does depth chart get affected, but really nice pieces here. And I think Braswell Thomas long-term, I called Beckham Kritzer the mystery man on offense. Maybe he's the mystery man on defense because of what he wasn't able to go out there and do as a senior because of an injury, and because he kind of did it with the camp performance. And when you talk about a guy really wowing with the camp performance, you want to see what that translates when you start stacking up college practices and you start stacking up game weeks. And, does that all show up, or is this more of an instance of a guy looks really good in shorts and a t-shirt and does some special things? So a really compelling figure, I think, in this overall class. And I know I promised we'd break down the Oregon Ducks this episode. I pulled the plug on that. We've gone so far with our recruiting conversation, which I didn't want to shortchange any further. So we're going to save that Oregon Ducks breakdown for our next episode of the podcast, which will drop on Thursday. So stay tuned for that. Along with that, you'll hear from Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, and myself as we break down what we witnessed on the Penn State practice field on Wednesday, what we heard from James Franklin after practice, and we'll give you our predictions for the Big Ten championship game. But Tyler, before we say goodbye, and again, I promise you we'll come back next week, pick up the pieces again, and talk about this recruiting class a little more in depth and probably focus on a few of these players in greater detail. But what are the lingering question marks with this recruiting class? We know that you mentioned Andrew Olish. He's supposed to announce a decision Friday, whether he's sticking with Michigan, heading out to Oregon, or heading here to Happy Valley. But there's also a quarterback in play, Bryce Baker, North Carolina commit. He's waiting to see what their coaching situation is going to look like, and what Penn State was presented to them sounded pretty compelling last week when he made an official visit for the Maryland matchup. And anything else out there hanging around that we need to be aware of?
Baker's really the guy standing out right now. I think beyond that, there's a lingering desire to maybe see if there could be a way to replace Jaden Woods, who flipped to Florida on the edge before this cycle, comes to a close in February. Maybe Penn State circles a little bit more with Zahir Mathis from Philly Imhotep. We're gonna have to see what happens on that front. I haven't really heard any much buzz on that regard recently. And then, they're still keeping an eye on late risers, potential additions on both sides of the ball. Offensive tackle, Penn State's been getting involved with a former UCF tackle commit following the coaching change there. And really right now, though, I'm focused mainly on Bryce Baker because he's not going to be signing during this early signing period. UNC is going to get every chance to get that coaching hire right. But if he decides he wants to move on, Penn State has placed itself in a really good spot with him.
I appreciate it, Tyler. I know the work is just beginning as we start to work our way through this class and we start to get a chance to get quotes. Remember, coaches, staff members can't give anything on the record about these recruits until they are signed and members of this class officially. So it's our first chance to go on the record with staff members this week. You'll see a bunch of coverage coming your way at lions247.com. Some really compelling stuff coming from the coaches and recruiting coordinators today on a bunch of these dudes. So check out our coverage. Again, we're back at practice on Wednesday. We'll have a full practice notebook, photos, video of Nittany Lions on-field action. We have some injury things to keep an eye out for. So this is one of the busiest weeks I can ever remember in my 8 years of covering Penn State. Happy to have coworkers like you, Tyler, to row the boat in the same direction. I'll get after it with Daniel and Mark tomorrow on the podcast, and we'll look ahead to this matchup. But it's been a heck of a week, whirlwind, but we're getting it done, man.
Yeah, man, appreciate you.
All right, we'll check back in with you soon. Thanks for all your coverage from the cycle. Big tip of the cap to you. At some point, I hope you get a chance to exhale largely and appreciate what you got done over the course of this cycle for us at Lions 24/7.
Thanks, man. It's been a fun ride. We're not done yet, but this has been a really fun group to cover and get to know. So,
all right, take care. That's it from Tyler Calvaruso. That's it from me, Tyler Donahue. We will be back with you on Thursday for another Lions 24/7 podcast. You'll hear the latest from Penn State practice. You'll get a breakdown of the Oregon Ducks, who enter this matchup on Saturday with a 12-0 record. And who knows? It is a busy week. Maybe we'll sneak in a bonus podcast later on before kickoff with a special guest. Just something to keep in mind. Maybe. For now, I'm Tyler Donahue. This is the Lions 24/7 podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.